Welcome back to a brand new episode of Two Please. I'm your host, Abhin.
And I'm your co-host, Rohit.
And today we're talking about The Mummy, the 1999 one. Yeah, not the 2017 one starring Tom Cruise. We will talk about that, but that's not what this episode is about.
Yeah. Also, the reason that we wanted to sort of talk about The Mummy was, triggered by the fact that the Indiana Jones movie is releasing or has released this week to
by the time
middling
this episode
reviews.
comes out, for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it would have made sense to do an episode on an indie movie, but obviously for that very reason, we've decided not to do an episode on an Indiana Jones because expectations subverted. And we're doing an episode on The Mummy instead, which is, like Abhin mentioned, a 1999 movie directed by Sommers, starring Brendan Fraser, Arnold Vosloo, Rachel Weisz, Patricia Velasquez, and then you have Oded Fehr, and Hannah Murray. No, not Hannah Murray. Jonathan, I forget the guy who...
John Hannah.
The guy in Raw. John Hannah. Sorry, I got my names mixed up there. Yeah, John Hannah. And a bunch of other supporting characters. I'm forgetting the name of the guy who played Benny. He's integral to the movie,
Kevin,
but I don't really...
Kevin J.
O'Connell.
Yeah,
Kevin
O'Connell. Yeah.
O'Connor, because Rick O'Connell is the character. That's how I remember it. But anyways, so before we dive into the movie, we're going to talk about, because I'm sure for both of us, this is one of the earliest, those action adventure sort of swashbuckling movies that we'd watched. So there's that aspect to discuss. I also want to talk about how Egypt has been represented in the movie and in movies in general. I want to spend some time on that. So there's a lot of sort of, angles to look at this movie. But before we do that, let's start the show.
On May 7th.
Oh my God, it does exist.
Universal Pictures presents a world you never imagined.
I call it the doorway to hell.
A mystery you never expected.
This man was buried alive.
And an adventure you will never forget. The Mummy, rated PG-13, starts Friday at theaters everywhere.
All right. Now, like Rohit mentioned, we're recording this the week after Dial of Destiny hit theaters. Now, I watched the Dial of Destiny and I kind of had a lot of fun with it. On the official entry, I would say this is possibly the fourth best film on there. I mean, I have this love-hate relationship with Temple of Doom. I know this is the Mummy episode and I know we should be talking about the Mummy, but I'm going to spend a quick 5 minutes talking about Dial of Destiny, or even shorter, maybe 2-3 minutes. But yeah, I'm going back into the Indiana Jones bit. I have this love-hate relationship with Temple of Doom. It was the first Indiana Jones film I'd ever seen. I loved it when I first watched it. Since then, the depiction of India in the 1900s has kind of bothered me a little bit. I think it's, compared to the other two, is a fairly darker movie, if you think about it, because it's a thuggy cult and some of the imagery is pure nightmare fuel. Doesn't help that Amrish Puri is the bad guy in this movie, because it just further accentuates the nightmare part of it, because he terrified us as children throughout the 90s. So imagine seeing him rocking up in this and being like, oh shit, not again. So there's a lot I like about that movie, but there's a lot that I don't like about that movie. But I still say the trilogy remains fairly untouched. This is a good fourth entry. This is it's a good time. As James Mangold is always dependable. I did watch Kingdom of the Crystal Skull after I watched Dial of Destiny, and that was a slog to get through. It felt like I was watching an entire film that was shot in a studio when in fact was shot on location. So it looks really bad as well. So I'd still say that unofficially, The Mummy is the best sequel to the Indiana Jones franchise since its inception.
Nice way to bring it back. Yeah, I agree. I feel in spirit, it carries on that same feeling that you get when you watch an Indiana Jones movie. Or I would say, Indiana Jones is probably the prime example of that sort of movie. These are your basic, swashbuckling movies. It's not like Spielberg invented the genre, right? You've had this sort of... you've had, from the days of, say, an Errol Flynn in the early 30s, you've had him playing, I think, Sinbad or one of these pirates, and larger than life. your protagonist is larger than life. Your plot is
Mhm.
fairly straightforward. I think one of the characteristics of these sort of action adventure movies are that characters are very black and white. You
Yeah.
know right off the bat who to root for and who to root against. That they don't deal in these nuances of humans saying, hey, people are gray and all of that stuff. It's like, hey, good
Yeah.
guy, great guy, whatever, does
Mhm.
everything right, can't put a foot wrong. Uh, Pitched against an outright bad guy. I think where the drama or the enjoyment of these kind of movies come is from the fact that how equally matched are the antagonist and the protagonist, right? Those
Yeah.
cat and mouse games are what really keep you on the edge of your seat.
Mhm.
And like I mentioned, so it's not the first of its kind. Indiana Jones has done it as well. Probably the best, arguably the best of in that entry. But I would say in terms of sheer enjoyment, yeah, if you weren't looking to nitpick the aspects of the movie, I would say Mummy is right up there in terms of enjoyment. I mean, that's my first impression or the main takeaway from having watched at least the first of the first two movies, Mummy and Mummy Returns. I'm not going to really talk about Tomb of the Dragon Emperor or the 2017 remake, but the first two movies, and especially the first one, is like pure unadulterated fun.
Yeah, I think that's what the film was trying to go for. Now, let's kind of delve into the history of the film a little bit. Now, The Mummy is one of Universal Pictures' biggest, like, iconic monsters, right? You've had it began that whole monster franchise began with The Mummy back in 1932,
Yeah.
where they had Boris Karloff playing the Mummy. And I think the story is relatively the same compared to the 1999 version, but with a few changes. One is that they discover Imhotep, who is played by Boris Karloff, in the lost city of Hamunaptra, and they awaken him. And then he ends up driving the guys who discovered him crazy, and goes on to live in society as a dude named Ardeth Bey. And then he happens to come across this woman who he believes to be the reincarnation of his long lost love, Anaksunamun. So he then decides to hatch a ploy to kill her and then resurrect his long lost lover. And you have the good guys trying to stop it. Now, that's the skeletal structure of that story is taken and placed into the 1999 version. And I think up until that movie got made, Universal had been floating around the idea of a reboot. And in the 80s, they were looking at rebooting it as a slow burn, like a horror film. I think George Romero was once upon a time attached to this. He was supposed to remake it when he was a hot commodity, but that didn't end up materializing. And I think in the 90s, as films got bigger, the studio was like, okay, maybe we could do something and turn this into an action adventure film. And they had one directive that it remained PG-13. They didn't want a lot of blood. They wanted to scare people, but still bring audiences to the theaters. And the script landed in front of Stephen Sommers, who had done another movie called Deep Rising, I think a year prior. It's not very good, didn't do well commercially or critically, but it has developed a cult following since. A lot of people have described that movie as as aliens on a boat, because it's a bunch of guys who show up on this boat, and the boat is on a ship rather, and the ship is completely empty. The crew is missing, and then they realize that they're not alone. There's something with them in there. So Stephen Sommers was brought in to direct, and they got Brendan Fraser, they got Rachel Weisz, and like the stars that you mentioned. At one point, Leo DiCaprio was attached to this. He really liked the script, but he couldn't do it because I think he was tied down to the beach, and he said he didn't have the dates. Ultimately, the beach got delayed, but this movie went without him. I think Matt
And
Damon,
you
Ben
could only
Affleck,
pick
and
one
Tom.
type of sand.
Yeah. I mean, this is a movie where famously Rick O'Connor doesn't die in the end, and that wasn't Leonardo DiCaprio's brand at the time. So,
Yeah.
and I think Tom Cruise at this point was also offered the film but turned it down, and then but decided to
He was like,
rectify
I'll be
that
back.
mistake.
See you in 18 years.
See, yeah, exactly, right. So all of that happened. Brendan Fraser, who was, I wouldn't say he was the biggest star in the world at that point, but he was definitely, like, his stock had risen. He had George of the Jungle the year prior. He'd had Airheads. He'd done a bunch of pretty successful Hollywood studio movies. So
Yeah.
he would definitely seem like a hot commodity. And Rachel Weisz, I believe, was the only choice for this role, and she plays Evelyn Carnahan, who apparently, like, I think her surname is taken from the guy who actually uncovered
No,
Tutankhamun's tomb.
not Carter, the guy who
Hmm.
sponsored Howard Carter, Lord Canarvon. So Carnahan
Oh,
comes from Lord Canarvon. Yeah.
Canarvon is the one who sponsored it, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now
So I
that
mean, he
correct.
was an amateur Egyptologist who was very rich,
Hmm.
and he was like, "Hey, I'm gonna fund somebody's expedition and take credit for it." So, but then thankfully Howard Carter got equal credit. But anyway, I'm gonna address this point a little bit. I was gonna ask you whether her surname is inspired by that, but thankfully you brought it up yourself. But yeah, so
Yes.
that's the
Hmm.
reference.
Done. Okay. Now, the movie is pretty straightforward. There's a bunch of archaeologists and treasure hunters looking for the lost city of Hamunaptra because there's a lot of treasure that's meant to be buried there. And they ultimately end up awakening this 3,000-year-old mummy by reading from the Book of the Dead. And he, again, much like the 1932 version, is on a quest to resurrect his lover, Anaxunamun, who I think in this movie, she's portrayed to be the mistress of Pharaoh Seti the First, and Imhotep is his priest. They hatch a plan to kill the Pharaoh. They do it, but they get caught. Anaxunamun is killed, and Imhotep is mummified and cursed to. I mean, he's cursed in this little sarcophagus for about 3,000 years with a bunch of beetle-like scarabs. And they ultimately, that's where they find him. They read the incantation. He brings with him the 10 plagues, and it's up to the heroes of this film to stop him. So when did you first see this movie?
I think I watched it around 2000, 2001. I
Yeah.
think I watched it closer to when The Mummy Returns was releasing because a
Mm.
lot of that had a lot more promotion around it because of The Mummy's success. And I was like, hey, okay, let's watch The Mummy as well. Also, around the time I was really into history and Egyptology and stuff. I mean, there are three things that I've been very interested in growing up. One is astronomy, one is paleontology or dinosaurs, and Egyptology. These were like,
Mm.
I used to like really nerd out about these things, which is why, like Lord Carnarvon, and I know those names still. In fact, I want to spend some time on the what he said at the start, right? Which is the Boris Karloff 1932 movie. This was off of the back of a decade of a renewed interest in Egyptology, which was triggered by the 1922 discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb by Howard Carter, sponsored by Lord
Mm.
Carnarvon. Also, another way in which the movie sort of makes a reference to Tutankhamun is Anaxunamun. The name is that it comes from Ankhesenamun, which is the name of Tutankhamun's wife, and not. I
Okay.
mean, if you were to be,
Yeah.
if you were to get pedantic about real history, that's where you get the name from. And again, Tutankhamun, Anaxunamun, both refer to the god Amun, Amun-Ra, which is again a
Yeah.
god whose name you hear in the movie. In fact, I think Tutankhamun's dad Akhenaten is also a pivotal figure in Egyptian history because he tried to pivot the religion away from the worship of Amun to the worship of Aten, which was a god he favored. So there's a whole lot of intrigue and a whole lot of reasons why Akhenaten and the Tutankhamun are so pivotal to uh, the direction that Egyptian royalty took. Right. So there's all
Yeah.
of this that was, and obviously there was the subsequent air quotes curse of Tutankhamun, which got a lot of airtime, got people interested. So it was on the back of all of this that I guess Universal Pictures capitalized on this buzz and decided to come up with this, Hall of Horrors, whatever, the Gallery of
Mm.
Horrors, starting with the Mummy. That said, the history of Western fascination with the mummies goes back a little further than even the 1920s. In fact, the 1920s were a spike in interest after a brief dip in the preceding 20, 30 years. Because back in the Victorian era, 1860s to 1880s, mummies were really big because the Victorian era was when there was this, golden age of rediscovery of historical artifacts across the world, like Mesopotamia, your Levant, Egypt. All of the sites of ancient civilization were now primarily under British control, right? British
Hmm.
French control, and therefore these European colonists had this whole idea of sending scientists and archaeologists to kind of figure out history of civilization. And that's when a lot of this came to light. And in fact, mummies were a big thing in Victorian England. But they were not handled with the sort of care that archaeologists would have today.
Hmm.
Victorians are a lot more blasé about archaeological or preservation standards. In fact, they used to make paint pigments out of the flesh of mummies that they would recover. There was a pigment shade called mummy brown, which when you
Oh, wow.
read about it today, you're like, these priceless artifacts are just making paint out of them. But it was also because Egyptian locals, found that, hey, these mummies that we have lying around so abundantly seem to be fetching a lot of money with the white folks. So they also used to have these grave diggers who would raid tombs, pilfer treasures or mummified bodies themselves and sell them to the Brits. So there was this whole wave of fascination with mummies in Victorian England, which sort of dipped in the 1910s and 1900s. Then again with Tutankhamun's tombs discovery, it again spiked up. And then the movies, sort of rode that wave. I think you had the Boris Karloff movie in 32. You had the Hammer films across the 50s and 60s.
Hmm.
You had a bunch of spin-offs using the concept of mummies in sort of parody films as well. And then with 99, I guess it all sort of culminated into what, at least for most of us, is the definitive, the Mummy film series with Brendan Fraser. So while it might seem like a recent phenomenon, I just wanted to highlight the fact that there's a long history of Western fascination with mummies, with Egyptology and Egyptian history at large. Although they make they do a terrible job of depicting it historically or giving locals any representation. But I'll come to that point a little
I
further.
feel, yeah, I think with regard, this is set in 1926 Cairo.
Yeah,
So fun. They tried to shoot this in Egypt, but they couldn't because of some political unrest. So naturally, next step is to take this to Morocco because it's easier to shoot, and a lot of the
of course. All
buildings have,
sand is
yeah.
sand.
Even Dial of Destiny, for that matter, goes straight back to Tangier, and that's set in like the 1950s. No, it's, what am I saying? 1969. So it's set during the moon landing. So even that goes to Morocco for a hot minute. So clearly seems to be the go-to spot for action adventure films.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is they end up discovering Brendan Fraser in this little jail, and because he's apparently the only guy to have actually uncovered or discovered the city of Hamunaptra when he was fighting with
Yeah.
his regent there. And this is the scene where like he's in jail and then they hang him. And apparently while shooting the film they really did hang him, and it's happened to two people. It's happened to him and it's happened to Michael J. Fox. I think they both almost died from these sequences. They had to resuscitate Brendan Fraser during the sequence.
I mean,
And
we
there's a
can
bit of,
laugh at this now, but in light of what's happened on the set of Rust, it's just that much harder to laugh about these things. It's just like, ooh, okay.
ooh, yeah, it's just I mean, we think Hollywood has all these precautions in place, possibly, but no, it's just everyone's just winging it and hoping things fall
Yeah.
into place. So apparently one of the directors for this film, and I find that so absurd saying this now in 2023, is that they didn't want a lot of practical effects. I think by the 1990s, people were sick of practical effects, which I find bizarre because CGI was coming up on the horizon because 93 Jurassic Park had really changed the landscape of what CGI could do when it comes to motion pictures, right? So when when the Mummy was being shot, I think there were directives being handed out to ILM, who are basically the godfathers of visual effects. Them and Weta side by side have pioneered the visual effects space in the world for the last 20 to 30 years. And the amount of effort that has gone into making this film is Herculean. Like they had to animate how each muscle part moved. I sat through and watched a lot of the Mummies behind the scenes. This was a record high 164 VFX shots for a film at that time. It had never been done before. If you do watch it now, it's not aged well. Like you can clearly tell, like this is the
I would still
inception
say
of.
the first movie still feels okay. Second one, the Scorpion King animation is utter ass. First movie
Yeah,
still like I can swallow
like,
it.
but there are parts. Yeah, there are parts of it where you're just like, okay. Like there's the sequence towards the end when Brendan Fraser is basically fighting off the the priests of when
Oh yeah,
during the
yeah, yeah,
Unreasonably is being resurrected. Now, and behind the scenes, he's fighting thin air. Like he's being directed to just uh, punch and kick and slash, and they animate the corpses in, and it doesn't look very good, especially because they do bring in some practical effects with the guards. You know, the four menacing guards that they pull in. The guards
Mm.
were a mix of CGI and practical. So in the close-ups, obviously they're terrifying, but once they're that mouth drops, the imitative mouth drop, which scared the pants off of us as kids, is obviously CGI.
Yeah.
And I think even Arnold Vosloo spoke about this in an interview. Arnold Vosloo is the guy who plays Imhotep, and he says he'd never been in a scenario before. He's like, he thought that this was going to hamper his performance. He wouldn't be able to do certain things. So he went to ILM and he told ILM, listen, I don't understand anything you guys do because I'm nowhere as intelligent as you are. You tell me what you need and I will give you exactly that. And which is why even underneath all that makeup in some scenarios and the whole scarab eating sequence. He's a terrifying villain.
Yeah.
Not just when he's in his mummified form, especially again when he's out of his mummified form, he really brings this presence which a lot of films in that genre don't have. They don't have a villain that's truly menacing. Maybe okay, you could say Raiders, and you could probably make the case for Amrish Puri for us in Temple of Doom. But the other kind of Indiana films, especially Last Crusade, there is no menacing villain at the end. It's the race against time scenario, and so the same can be said for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Dial of Destiny, Mads Mikkelsen is good. It's Mads Mikkelsen, but he's not something you'd call menacing. And I think
Mm.
the decision to go with an action adventure meets a creature feature is definitely plays a big part in this film, because even if you aren't particularly afraid of horror films, or there are points in this film that make you jump. And if you've watched this in the 90s, there are parts in the film, especially when Imhotep goes after the four treasure hunters who've
Yes, I
taken
was just
the
going to
parts in the
say the
box.
guy with the eyes who loses his glasses. That entire
Yeah,
sequence is quite scary.
like it doesn't end well for him, right? Because he escapes, and then Imhotep goes back to him and
Yeah.
mummifies him in his chambers. So that whole sequence where where they turn into these little husks is there's quite a it's quite a scary image.
It is. It is. In fact, as you were mentioning the different aspects of the movie, I also realized the other point, right? Which is this movie juggles so many multiple genres. Obviously, it's
Yeah,
a period piece because it's about Egyptian history. It's also a love story, which we will get into. And like Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz's characters, or Rick and Evelyn's characters, have a very nice arc. It's very clearly that it is obviously an action adventure movie. It's a creature feature. It's a horror film. It's comedy because of John Hannah's character and because of Benny. In some ways, it's also like a white savior movie because you have these, the archetype of the noble savages being aided by your white characters to sort of set the situation right. So, but it does all of this. It manages this juggling sort of deftly, right? Because think if you think about it, within like what less than 2 hours, you've been able to more or less convincingly hit the nail on the claim for being any of these kind of movies.
Hmm.
So in that sense, I guess it's also why this movie has a lot of rewatch value, because on one rewatch you could be like, hey, I really just want to enjoy the history aspect or the
yeah.
recreation of history of it. The other time you just want to focus on the romantic plots, or the other time you just want to focus on the horror. I think I find myself focusing more on that side of the horror side of it in my more recent rewatches, or just the
Mhm.
humor, right? Like the famous Benny scene where he's like, looks like
I've got all the horses.
looks like you're on the wrong side of the river.
No, and that's a historical like that's a history joke, right? Because the Nile is known to be notoriously wide. So
Yes.
for Benny to even get the horses and go all around, it's going to take him a significantly longer time,
Yeah.
which is why, I mean, obviously it sounds hilarious in when the moment happens, but then if you actually deep it a little more, it's like, okay, uh, there's some real thought went into writing that joke. Just wasn't a throwaway line.
True. And again, that scene for me has like peak indie energy, right? I mean, if you think about if you spend a minute on the character of Rick O'Connell, uh, they have sort of distilled what works with indie and just sort of heightened it, right? He's
Yeah,
roguish. He just seems to get away with things. He seems to have
yeah.
infinite luck. Uh, but at the same time, underneath that rough, roguish charm and humor, you can see there's depth to the character, and which is the foundation on which his relationship with Evelyn is built through the course of the movie. So again, you need for these kind of movies to work, your protagonist has to be convincing, right?
Mm.
You look at Indiana Jones movies, you look at the westerns which had John Wayne, or even Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Uh, if it wasn't for a Jack Sparrow, what is the anchor that holds you to watch the rest of the movie, right? So I
Mm.
think that's why his character is very important, and I mean, full credit to, or rather, no discredit to Rachel Weisz or any of the other characters. I mean, Evelyn or her brother Jonathan or any of the other characters. But if you get them right and still get Rick O'Connell wrong, the movie doesn't work, is what I feel.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Because I think you even like if you look at Indiana Jones, and I mean that's the A tier of action adventure films, right? Especially the first three. The
Right.
movies don't work without Harrison Ford. I mean, the supporting cast are all there to prop him up. I think Rachel Weisz is very
Yeah.
good in this movie. Don't get me wrong, but Brendan Fraser's roguish charm is what really keeps you coming back, because he's nearly in every other scene. You gravitate to him because he's got
Yeah.
that fine blend of action and comedy, and I don't think there's a better representation of it in the scene where Imhotep is fascinated by Rachel Weisz's character Evelyn, and he's got her up against a wall, and Rick O'Connell comes running through the room, and he turns around, looks at the mummy, and and he screams, and then the mummy
Yeah.
screams
Yeah.
at him, and he
It's
screams back at the mummy, and he shoots him, and he runs away. Like he doesn't even think, he's like, shoot first, ask questions
Ask
later, right?
questions later. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he's like, no, I got him. I'm pretty sure I got him. So he doesn't consider himself to be like the brains of behind the project. Far from it. He knows his limits. He knows he's a hired hand, but he will do whatever he can to get himself out of the situation.
Actually, I think that's where he differs from Indy. Indy has a scholastic side to him because he's a history
Of course,
professor.
yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's that. You have got to hand that, one extra point to Indiana. But yeah, other than
And
that,
I think
I see a lot of
and I mean,
similarity.
yeah. And barring the Holy Grail, Indiana Jones's main obsession with artifacts is just to return them to museums. It's a standard. I think the Holy Grail is the only time where he's like been caught by the allure of it, right? He's had it in his hands, and his dad is the one that tells him to let him go. Which,
Correct. And also that is a lot more altruistic on Indy's part because everyone in this movie is just in it for the dough. Right? At
yeah,
least up until Rick and Evelyn seem to have their spark going on, it's just everyone's just in it for the dough. Which
basically, I
is
think
which is the other.
except Rachel Weisz's character. Rachel Weisz's character
Yeah,
is
sorry.
actually
I
interesting.
think Rachel Weisz and Rick O'Connell together sort of form Indy. I would say they've kind of
Yeah.
split his characteristics into these two. But that brings me to the other point. Again, I'm not here to sort of criticize the movie. Far from it, because I guess I'm maybe more overcompensating for the fact that both Abhin and I love this movie so much. I know we're going to like wax eloquent about it. So I'm just getting the problematic stuff out of the way first. But the point on the treasures is it brings me to the other theme that I wanted to sort of discuss. Right, that obviously this is in 1999 where representation and political correctness were a lot more in its infancy than they are today. they've found a lot more expression today. But do you think if this movie were to be made today, it would have the sort of casting it did? Because there is blatant I wouldn't say disrespect, more like disregard to the fact that you've set a movie in Egypt. You have absolutely zero Egyptian actors.
Yeah.
You're showing, the movie starts off with showing the city of Thebes. It's a city of life, and you're showing the pyramids and the Sphinx, and you're with your subtitle say or your title card saying Thebes. I'm like, bro, this is like shitting in the face of geography. And if you know for a fact that those things are in Cairo, why are you saying it's in Thebes, right? So it's clearly fantastical. I'm not saying they're owed historicity. I mean, I'm not saying we are owed historicity, but you can try. So there's
Yeah, for
that,
sure. I think
and also throughout the movie, last point here, that throughout the movie, the historical artifacts that aren't gold or silver or gems are just shot at, and they're broken down without a second thought. I mean, guys, it's still ancient. These things are 3,000 years old. Can we show it some respect? So I guess in a way it's accurate, because that's how people in that time did treat non-valuable, air quotes, non-valuable artifacts. But it just feels odd watching this in today's day and age, when there's a lot more sensitivity towards these things. The one most egregious thing that struck me was the casting of Oded Fehr as Ardeth Bey, right? Because dude's Israeli, and if you know your history, picking an Israeli to play a character who is as dyed in the wool Egyptian as it can get is just like shooting political correctness in the face. This is the worst possible nationality you could pick a guy from. So clearly that wasn't something that they had prioritized.
and nobody even mentioned this, right? Like, I don't think this was ever brought up as some sort of
Yeah. I'm guessing
controversy.
public discourse at the time was not sensitive to or aware of these topics. A lot more.
Yeah, especially with regards to with regards to casting choices. And I would always blame this. I think for me personally, there has been no egregious casting choice, more egregious rather, than that of Divya Narendra in The Social Network. And for me, it absolutely just I love The Social Network. You know how much I love The Social Network, but
Yeah.
having to see Max Mangala play a very brown dude. If you've seen Divya Narendra, he's such a brown dude. Max Mangala is the polar opposite. So, and that movie came out in 2010. So I don't think people give a shit about representation. Funnily enough, till let's say till about 4
Dude, they
years ago.
made Rachel Weisz half Egyptian. Evelyn is half Egyptian or something, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. She's
one of her parents is like the whitest person in Egypt, right? For her to look like this.
yeah, because isn't in the second movie, right? And I'm spoilers for the Mummy Returns, guys. Sorry, a 20-year-old movie at this point. Isn't she the reincarnation of Nefertiti in the second
Yeah.
movie? Yeah.
She is. So she's Seti's daughter. I'm like, is he fine? Is he like having sex with Casper the ghost or something? Like, how is his daughter looking?
And I think isn't Nefertiti also supposed to be like a few 100 years older than Seti, or is it the same era? I mean,
Seti the first was, again, I'm forgetting. Nefertiti is, I mean, it's on the same timeline for sure.
yeah,
At least 150 years off, if not 400 to 500 years off.
yeah. So this movie is not going for historical accuracy by
It's
any
just
stretch of
picking
the
names which either are familiar or names which sound Egyptian, right?
yeah.
So, okay, you have Nefertiti, Nefertari, these are known names. Imhotep, you may have heard if you've heard of Boris Karloff movies. Anaxanamun, Seti, and I mean, Seti was a real ruler, not in a different. So they picked some names saying, hey, this sounds Egyptian enough, let's put it there. Hamunaptra doesn't even exist, right? So,
About halfway through
high
the film, you're like, okay,
fiction.
fine. Yeah, extreme high fiction. I think halfway through the film, you're just like, okay, I get it. I get that there is like that part of me I clearly cannot placate because this is not the movie for it. I'm just going to
Yeah.
go along for the ride.
But you have fun on the ride, right? Like they also
Yeah,
have these
like
very nice, ingenious scenes where that
funny
whole
you men- yeah, funny
the
you
hallway,
mentioned
the
rides.
light. Why? Oh, the Mummy ride.
because
Yeah, yeah. I've
yeah.
sat on that
So
in
yeah,
Universal.
so in the Universal Studios Singapore. So here's before. I mean, I'm sorry for breaking down the conversation. I think we'll get back to it. But the Mummy ride is one of the most successful Universal Studio rides since I don't know time immemorial. And when
It's
they
pretty
first
kick-ass, right?
opened, yeah, it's so good. It's so much fun.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
did the ride at least 3-4 times, and if you haven't done it, I
It
highly
had the
recommend that you
longest
do.
line. It had the longest line in Universal of any ride.
Yeah, for sure. But when I visited, I think this was 10, 12 years ago, Singapore, there was nobody there. So we just like went about 3 times with no issues. But I fully get like when it there have been legendary stories about the lines for the Mummy ride, and when things got really like hot, right, and people were getting irritated, they'd break the tension by reenacting a sequence from the movie, which I didn't know. So like the all the people in the line would start chanting Emotep, like go Emotep, Emotep, which is something we did at a music festival years ago, but no correlation. I had no idea that this was a thing in the Universal Studios line. But it's a really nice fact to have dug up that people did have like this movie really resonated with a lot of people.
It's, I remember, I mean, again, this was in 2007, so it's over 15 years since I was on the ride. This was in the one in Orlando. But
Mm.
again, I remember like a half an hour, 40-minute line. And it's like a roller coaster meets a haunted house sort of
Yeah.
experience, which is quite unique. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, coming back to what I was saying, right, about ingenious sequences in the film, they really do this. I feel in a way they sort of presaged these puzzle games like a Portal and stuff, where you have these puzzles that they need to solve. There's one where
Yeah.
they need to rearrange mirrors for this beam of light to strike at a particular place, and this also sort of plays into Egyptian tropes, which are, they had a lot of booby traps and stuff like that, which also comes from that same history of the curse of Tutankhamun. And in fact, when Howard
Mhm.
Carter uh, broke open the tomb of Tutankhamun, people who went in initially came out having a lot of cough and they felt jaundice. That was because, I mean, you're breathing in 3,000-year-old air, which, there's been no circulation. What are you expecting?
Mm.
But it came
Yeah.
from that very real phenomenon. You had these stories built out of, fanciful stories saying these pharaohs had booby trapped their tombs and you try to open it and stuff happens to you. And this movie liberally plays that aspect of up, but it's to great effect, right? It's a lot of fun. You see these sort of them solving these things, and uh, even the fat jailer guy, when he takes the scarab out, it backfires on him because it is something that he's not supposed to, and the scarab activates and bites him or something. So while it comes from a problematic place, I would say problematic because it feels almost tokenistic to have to
Uh-huh.
play to these Egyptian tropes. Its outcome is fun. It's those scenes are nice and they're memorable.
The scarab, now that you think about those things freaked the fuck out of me as a child.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, like, how did they enter? There's no incision it made to enter your skin. It's scientifically like where did it enter from, and what is it doing under your skin? It's messed up.
does it not make the incision? Like, does it not cut through the hand and then goes up? Like, because he picks it, he holds it in his hand, and it cuts through his palm and then like
There's no
goes up
blood.
his
I'm,
hand.
I'm guessing because of the PG-13
Yeah.
thing, they don't show any blood, so it just feels unrealistic. Like, what did it like get in and then sew itself shut behind it? What happened?
Apparently, and this is something I did not know, is that when Imhotep was cursed, the scarabs were cursed with him. So they spent 3,000 years of eating each other, which is why, when that scarab goes into his mouth, he ends up eating it.
Mm.
So it's just like it's supposed. That's why they're still alive. So when they open his tomb or when they ultimately discover the city, the scarabs are like, what the hell? They have also been forced to live to eternity, feasting on
So
everything that
basically, when
moves.
the tomb was opened, they were like, "Hey, buffet, let's go."
Some of it is really creep me out, and I remember being because I mean they scuttle like little cockroaches, right? And that
Yeah,
it re-enhances the real world fear of insects, or in fear, but rather the ick of insects.
yeah, true, true. Uh, the last I mean, not last. I have a couple of points. The other point I want to talk about, I want to spend a brief minute on uh, the in the impractical hotness of the cast across the board, right? Like, how do any of these guys get any work done? I would not be able to focus. Like, look at Brendan Fraser, look at Rachel Weisz, look even Arnold Vosloo for that matter, Patricia
Yeah.
Velasquez. I would even put sort of shoehorn John Hannah in there. Oded Fair, like guys.
Oded Fehr is, my God, he's just smoldering throughout.
If all of these were to be in one room, they'd be like, fuck the mission. They'll just be like instant orgy or something, right? Like, how are you supposed to focus on the story in this movie? I don't know. It's very hard.
1920s, people weren't as horny as they were today, I assume.
Especially the lead pair. I mean, both of them. I mean, Rachel
The
Weisz.
lead pair, Rachel Weisz really committed to the thin eyebrow, right? Because I kept wondering what's wrong with her face, and then I realized the eyebrow. She has these little pencil thin eyebrows, and when you like look at Rachel Weisz's face, generally you associate the big bushy eyebrows that she has.
Yeah.
So it's very strange to see her in this film with those weird pencil eyebrows.
You are
And
looking at
they're
her
gone,
eyebrows.
but
Okay, cool.
I mean, yeah, Rohit. But yeah, continuing on, barring Rachel Weisz's eyebrows, I think
I
the
mean,
best part
I
of this
can
film.
equally spend as much time talking about Brendan Fraser. Man was peak at like looks wise at that point. Peak
His
charm,
hair is
everything.
just
Yeah, his hair is a feat of like wonder, dude.
it has like it was living in the Jennifer Aniston era of hair. It was
His hair did not know he was in a desert environment. Like it's supposed to be dry,
yeah.
bro. Not how your hair is supposed to look.
Like, what's your conditioning routine, especially for like that
Seriously.
kind of heat? Please do tell. But the best, yeah. What's the best part of the movie for you?
Um, my favorite scene, I would say, I have two. One is the flashback army scene, right? When 1923, when the Magi are going to attack Rick O'Connell's unit,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Benny abandons them at the last moment. It's got
yeah,
action, it's got comedy, and when the whole tomb thing, Imhotep's tomb, that face in the sand comes up. So again, within a scene, you see it jump across three genres. So I really
everything. Yeah,
enjoyed that scene. The other one I enjoy is the part where she's reading from the book. Uh, and the preceding scene when she's drunk and she has a conversation with Rick O'Connell, and then immediately after she reads from the book and awakens the mummy. The film is kind of signaling to you, hey, it starts building dread, like, hey, something's going to happen. This is that pivotal moment, and then you're like, don't do it, and then she reads from it, and then that the head curator gets up and is like, oh no, what have you done? And you feel sort of, you get the same emotion he has. You're like, what have you done, Evelyn? Like, you
it takes
unleashed it.
the cabin, the cabin in the woods book, hidden book concept, and expands it out. Like
Yeah,
it's like Evil Dead, but in Egypt.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's got that same sort of uh, campy body horror feel to it that Evil Dead does. Not as much, obviously. Evil Dead is
Yeah,
that feeling is central to what makes Evil Dead work. But again, there are parts where Imhotep, the mummy, is very scary, which we've already discussed. But even the part where the same scene, right, when Rick O'Connell enters the room and he sees Imhotep, Imhotep screams, he screams. They've also mined comedy from the horror of
horror. Yeah,
Imhotep. And when he
yeah,
throws the cat at Imhotep, he recoils and whatever, he tornadoes away or he swooshes
yeah.
away. So those are I would say more campy than like outright horror. So it's got that sort of feel to it. Again, another genre to add to the juggling list that the movie pulls off. So yeah, it's got, I don't know. I do see shades of Evil Dead, like you mentioned. Uh, it takes inspirations from all of these, I feel. Which begs the question, right? If Stephen Sommers got this lightning in a bottle not once but twice in Mummy Returns as well, what did he do after this? Like, where did he go?
Van Helsing.
Oh yeah, he did that, which is again, it's rated like 26%. Like, fuck critics, dude. The movie is awesome.
I have a lot of fun with Van Helsing. I mean, I've watched it recently. The CG is terrible. It has a very weird Dracula performance. Like Richard Roxburgh is like doing a Broadway show.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very
and
weird.
yeah, it's very strange. And it seems like this. Like a gothic take on the whole vampire universe, because I think Universal really liked what both the Mummy and the Mummy Returns were huge commercial successes, and Stephen Sommers I think and Van Helsing again did well but was critically panned. And since, I don't know, his career took a bit of a dive because he did G.I. Joe Rise of Cobra, which has Arnold Vosloo in it, and
which is a movie. I think that's the most
it's a
charitable.
movie. I mean, it has Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Cobra Commander. So just like the most, before Jesse Eisenberg was Lex Luthor, Joseph Gordon-Levitt was Cobra Commander, which I find still absurdly stupid.
Yeah.
But coming back to this, right? I think funnily for me, the best part of the film was Kevin J. O'Connor's Benny. I think Benny really brings this film's humor, because if you think about most of the funny scenes in this film,
I think between him and
almost
Jonathan, I would say, but primarily Benny.
Yeah, like you think at Benny, the opening where he runs away from from Rick
I
at the
love
start.
that turn.
Then obviously the O'Connor, others, it seems to be, I've got all the horses. And then the other part is where Imhotep runs into him and he starts pulling out different chains of different religions in order to chant. And it's Hebrew that ultimately Imhotep understands, and he's like, "Oh, you'll be a good servant to me," and off they go on this little journey together, right? And even in the end, I think his greed is what ultimately costs him, because repeatedly throughout the film, his greed almost costs him, but he keeps getting away with it. And finally, towards the end, he's in the room and he's like, "Oh my God, there's so much treasure!" And O'Connor's like, "Dude, just get the fuck out of here. This whole place is collapsing." And ultimately, it costs him. And then when the Scarabs come circling in, and I don't really like. I know he deserved the ending. I know like it really tied his arc very neatly. I would have loved to see him in The Mummy Returns, because I think they give a lot of the comedy to John Hannah to carry, and he does a good job of it. I still find The Mummy Returns to be an entertaining film. I did watch it as well in the days after this, like a late night thing when I was having some food. It's not as good, clearly not as good. It's definitely got a bigger budget, and that Scorpion King ending really throws me off. It was bad in 2002. It is worse.
It was bad when it released only. I was like, dude.
I mean, the poor. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying the words "poor" Dwayne Johnson, because this was the start of his career, right? He'd just been branching out from WWF to movies. He'd done Walking Tall. He'd been pulled into this, and they gave him a spin-off. I think they felt so bad they gave him a spin-off that I've seen a fair few times, called the Scorpion King.
Spin-off. Yeah, it's again, it's a movie.
It's a movie. Yeah, it's not a very good movie. It's a movie.
Yeah.
But I really love Benny in the first film. I really love the humorous aspects of the first film. And
I think I get exactly what you're saying, right? You love to hate him, but at the same time, you don't want to see him go away.
Yeah, like keep this guy on screen. He's a slimy, like dirty little fucker, but who's got hilarious comic timing. And every time, Brendan Fraser starts throwing him around from place to place. It's so hilarious. He really pulls off those scenes. I was watching it and I was still laughing. Like I was like, oh, about 20 years later on, this movie's comedy has not aged. I mean, has aged perfectly. So, and that's just one aspect of the film, because there have been, even now, the whole, we did mention it earlier about the husks, the final sequence where Imhotep is basically throwing them around that little chamber where he's resurrecting Unreasonably, and Jonathan is trying to read off the book while being chased around by Unreasonably's dead like mummified corpse.
Second movie?
No, like she's in the mummified she's mummified.
Correct. The second movie
in the second one,
figure it out.
In the second movie, she resurrects him. Like they resurrect her first, and then they bring Imhotep back, right? So, and this is the one where I think even the guards are attacked. Then he manages to finally get hold of the guards, and the guards are the ones that stab Anaksunamun. And then they read the incantation, and
The guards must be like, oh damn, it's the last thing we are supposed to do. We're fucked, bro.
not even that. She reads the incantation, and Brendan Fraser stabs Imhotep, right? And Imhotep
Yeah.
pulls him further in. And I remember like watching the film, and I'm like, oh, I remember this line. I remembered it all, uh, like all my like ever since I watched it. Every time I watch the movie, the one line I remember is "He's mortal," because when she stabs him, and then he realizes that, like Imhotep realizes that, oh shit, shit just got real, and he falls into that little river Styx like
Hmm.
pond in the middle of the room. I was like, oh damn, like such a cool payoff to the end.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I agree. That's what I think. In that respect, the movie. I don't know. Like I was reading some reviews about the movie written at the time. They said the script was weak, and the screenplay could have been better. I'm like, what more do you want, guys? Like it's tight. The story is coherent. Things that are set up in the first or second act of the movie have a payoff at the end. Honestly, what more do you need? This movie ticks all the box. I mean, as a great theater experience or a great viewing experience in general.
I watched this on television. I remember I watched it on a Friday night because I clearly was not allowed to go watch this in movie theaters. My mother took one look at the post and went, no. So I remember on a Friday night, I just sat home and it was playing on cable television and I loved it. By the end of it, I was like, "Oh, this is so good." And I told my dad, I said, "If you watch The Mummy, it's like," and I described it to him, and he said, "Come with me." And we went to the DVD store and said, "Do you have Raiders of the Lost Ark?" They said, "No, but we have Temple of Doom." And he handed me Temple of Doom. So that's how I was introduced to Indiana Jones. It's like, this movie was nice, but this is where it's at. This is like the films you should be watching. I was like, cool, and my life has not been the same since. So
I
Ebert
can
also
imagine.
wrote,
Yeah.
yeah, he also wrote a few thoughts on this film. And he and C School, but C School not so much, but I think he was definitely writing around this time, right? He said, "There is within me an slaked hunger for preposterous adventure films. I resist the bad ones, but when a Congo or an anaconda comes along, my heart leaps up and I cave in. The Mummy is a movie like that. There is hardly a thing I can say in its favor, except that I was cheered by nearly every minute of it. I cannot argue for the script, the direction, the acting, or even the Mummy, but I can say that I was not bored and sometimes I was unreasonably pleased. There is little immaturity stuck away in the crannies of even the most judicious of us, and we should treasure it."
A couple of the movies that he mentioned in that quote also bring me to the last point that I want to mention. Again, slightly
Yeah,
serious
sure.
point, but stuff he mentioned Congo, set in Africa, Anaconda, set in South America. A lot of these swashbuckling movies have a very, the colonists are good sort of point of view. I wouldn't go so far as to call it white savior, although I could. But think about it, right? You
Definitely, yeah,
have
definitely.
Indiana Jones set in wherever Egypt, Raiders of the Lost Ark is Egypt. Then you have Last Crusade
India,
is, I mean, shot in Petra. I don't know what it's set in, but
Jordan.
it's
Uh,
Jordan. So Jordan. Again, Mummies in the Egypt. You have all of your John Ford, John Wayne westerns where you have the white frontiersman or the white pioneer overcoming what are essentially the Native Americans who are shown as bad folks, right? They're
yeah,
savages, they're violent, and stuff like that. Even the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, you have essentially European sailors coming to South America, Caribbean, or the Caribbean. Uh, the locals don't really get a say or aren't accurately represented. Or I would go so far as to say they're misrepresented in these movies. Classic case
yeah,
being Temple of Doom, what you started the episode off with, right? I mean,
yeah.
you have this whole scene with monkey brain, chilled monkey brain. I'm like,
Chili monkey brain.
we're not like this. And I'm sure if 10 people in the US watch this movie, at least 5 of them will be like, hey, this is exactly what India is like.
Yeah,
And that's
I,
Temple of Doom, and all of these movies are misrepresenting all of these things, right? I'm sure that there's people in the US or people in Europe who have great misconceptions about Egypt or the Levant because of stuff they've seen in these movies, or even about Native Americans. It's so yes, the movies are, because they're lighthearted, because they're a romp of a time, they can get away with it. But underlying this subliminal message that gets passed about the other in the film is problematic.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, coming back to Temple of Doom, right? It's if they remove that whole chill monkey brain sequence, like I've seen it so many times. I know the entire like scene by heart. It begins with the snake, and then they start bringing in the other creatures, and there's the
Yeah.
snake surprise, which is like it's if you take that sequence out of the film and you keep the rest of it, I don't have a single problem with the film. I guess this it represents the Thuggy cult, and this movie came to me at a time where I was really interested in what the Thuggy cult's uh, problem was, because I think what
Problem.
1800s, like the famously
What's your
Kali
problem,
machine.
dude? Why are you strangling people? Kya chal raha hai?
Yeah, I don't know what's happening, but yeah, and it's supposed to be a prequel. Temple of Doom is set before Raiders of the Lost Ark,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so it's. I mean, it feels like a very different film, and I think because of the criticism it received, Spielberg course corrected. And if you watch The Last Crusade, it's a very light-hearted film. It's basically Raiders light, and even though I think they try and incorporate a little more of the the people that that are equal that are involved in this scenario. I think they have a in Raiders, not Raiders, rather, sorry, in The Last Crusade, there's a brotherhood that is trying to keep the Holy Grail a secret, and they have that conversation on the boat, and they play a bigger part in the film. But coming back to the whole point that it feels like this is a playground for two colonial forces to kind of go against each other. Indiana Jones is all about
Exactly.
fighting the Nazis, and every the playground that the Nazis
Exactly. It's like two
protagonists.
European powers destroying 1,000-year-old artifacts in Egypt for their own little power play.
Yeah, one of them has slightly good intentions, but in terms of they're all chasing glory, right, of some form of the other. Like the Nazis want anything possible to make Hitler win the war. There's a very Dial of Destiny does something that's very that one could say jump the shark. I remember when I watched it, like how every Indiana Jones has this big reveal at the end, where like a supernatural reveal at the end, and Dial of
Mhm.
Destiny is no different. This is probably the first time I watched an Indiana Jones film and went, okay, that this is a little comedic. It might be a little absurd. It's a little comedic, and it's not like funnily and thankfully it's not set in in a population where the culture is vastly different. That's all I'll say. So like it doesn't feel like the movie is shooting at indigenous people, and that's probably the only credit I can give the film when it comes to that aspect. It's set during the moon landing, and this film, it's a Disney film. It's very sanitized. So I feel like they would basically ran through a checkbox of things to make sure that the film did. And in spite of that, it's still not well reviewed for some reason or the other.
No, I'm guessing you can't really do these things anymore. I
No.
feel in that sense Black Panther was a watermark film, right? Where
Yeah.
Black Panther put representation so front and center as part of its proposition to the audience, is saying, hey, here we're serious about telling the black story. And not African American story. We're going like OG black, right? We're
Yeah.
telling the African story. So that's how I see it. I don't know. I could be wrong, but it's like this. Up until that point, you could probably get away with it saying, "Hey, guys, storytelling." It's like, but whatever. It's a fun movie. I think Black Panther. I don't mean this in a bad sense. Sort of sucked the fun out of these sort of movies. Like, no, even if you're making these sort of movies, you have to tick these PC boxes and you have to have representation
I
and
I
stuff.
don't even think like keeping that in mind would suck the life out of these movies, because you want a film that ticks along. That I think it's the characters that really make the film for what they are. Because even
Mhm.
uh, going back to Raiders, I know Salah is played by John Rice Davies again. uh, I mean, this is famous in the industry where Mickey Rooney played a Japanese man in Breakfast at Tiffany's, one of the most revered films of all time. So I'm not surprised. I don't think you require those boxes being ticked to make a good action adventure film. Because if you go back from The Mummy, I think there haven't been, like, name an action adventure movie that you've liked since The Mummy. That was Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out in 2008, and it has notoriously been disliked by the majority of people. National Treasure is a film that I've liked, and it's set primarily in America. And Nicolas Cage it's a fun film. Is it better than The
National
Mummy? I don't
Treasure
think so.
is it's definitely not better than the Mummy, but at least
Mm.
National Treasure doesn't have these problematic elements to it, right?
It
It's
does
like
not.
the story is about fucked up white people from the past, and fucked up white people today are like breaking white people shit to like figure this thing out, and are chasing some treasure, which it's all contained within America. It's in that sense, at least, its heart is in the right place. Probably the only sense in which its heart is in the right place. But again, it's a fun movie. It is. It's not swashbuckling. Nicolas Cage isn't an action hero in the traditional sense. He's a lot nerdier than Eric O'Connell. But it's a fun watch. It doesn't denigrate other people, or rather, it doesn't highlight its protagonists at the cost of denigrating other people. And
Yes, for sure.
so, in that sense, it's a clean movie. I mean, I don't know if the term is right, but
Yeah, and I don't think even for a second when I was watching the film where I mean, clearly not, because I was a child at the time, and I feel the older you get, the more aware you are of the
yeah.
underlying issues at hand. Now, but coming back to my point about the depth of action adventure films, because I feel everything has become such a CGI fest these days, and with the rise of superhero films, you don't get to see these kind of movies anymore. And I really like these kind of movies because, one, it doesn't always have to be set on a green screen. It, like, you can, like, these big set pieces, then pulling historical artifacts from history that don't really exist. There's no good action adventure film to have come out since this that I've really liked. Even Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, I barely remember. I remember watching it, even Rachel Weisz didn't bother showing up. And it has, funnily enough, it has the two Oscar winners for this year in the same movie, because Michelle Yeoh is also in it as with Brendan Fraser. But it's not a very good movie. I think Rob Cohen directed it.
Imagine a retroactive like trailer for the movie featuring Oscar winner Brendan Fraser and shit. And you watch the movie, you're like, this shit, bro.
It's a terrible film. I think ultimately killed the
You know
franchise.
what? You could have had such a great franchise of historically set action adventure movies if the makers of the Assassin's Creed movie hadn't shit the bed entirely with their adaptation.
There was
That
such
could
a
have been
there was an
such a good
yeah,
thing.
there was an opportunity there, and I don't know what they decided to do with it.
Yeah, because
It
the
bored
games
me.
are they do that, right? They even in terms of the places they go to, it's not it ticks those boxes. They're not denigrating anyone. They tell an interesting story. They I think 8 out of 10 times they have protagonists that you can relate to, root for. It's all there. How did you mess it up so badly?
Continuing on with the trend, right? I think the action adventure genre basically went to live on consoles soon after, because
I guess.
Uncharted
Yeah.
1, 2, 3,
Oh
and
yeah,
what
Uncharted is
yes,
the yeah.
is the like, it does not exist without Indiana Jones. I mean, it is and it
Correct,
also
correct.
once again ticks the boxes, because you have the first one is set, I think, in the it's basically you're tracing Sir Francis Drake's journey, and the road to El Dorado. I think the first one is El Dorado. The second one is Shambhala, but that's up in Nepal. And the third, I think, again, is similarly, it is the Sands of Time or something like Atlantis. They're looking for the city of Atlantis. I could be wrong. And the fourth is set, I'd like to say, in Madagascar. Yeah.
And the Uncharted stories are insane, man. Great
It's so much
storytelling.
fun, right? Like, you have a great
That
blueprint of what
yeah.
what works, and then the movie came out, and it was a serviceable film.
Yeah, it wasn't terrible. I enjoyed it
Yeah,
because I haven't played the game, so I don't hate the movie as much, I guess. Like I don't empathize with the outrage of Mark Wahlberg's casting as Sully because I don't know who Sully is and I haven't played.
yeah.
I enjoyed it, but I was like, yeah, this is a middling movie. It's nothing path breaking.
what was the last good action adventure film? Did you like The Adventures of Tintin?
Yeah, that was a good film. I mean, I wouldn't watch it again. It's boring, but it's a good one-time watch.
Yeah, and the rickshaw sequence on that movie, where they're flying through, like I don't know what town
Yeah,
they're in,
and then
is
this
yeah,
finally it's him swinging on that. That is epic. It's a one take. I mean, it's animation, but it's still a one
yeah.
take.
It's I think what very heavily inspired the Tangier sequence in Dial of Destiny, because I was watching it and I went, "Oh, this is the Tintin sequence," the rickshaw chase and all of it. So I don't know why that movie never got a sequel, because they basically went off. I mean, I'm a big Tintin guy. My love for action adventure films obviously comes from reading as well, right? Because Tintin was such a big part of my childhood, and this is split between The Secret of the Unicorn and Red Rackham's Treasure, and they're both such interesting stories. And I don't know, Spielberg and Peter Jackson. Funnily enough, Spielberg once again just dropped the idea of pursuing this, and it just never went anywhere. I think primarily because of the US audience, particularly, doesn't care for Tintin. Here, the rest of the world, we love that guy.
Yeah, and dumbass Americans. I'm thinking, what is the last good adventure movie? And the fact, what is the reason that I can't think of? And I think it is, or rather, it goes back to your point, right? The CGIfication of movies just doesn't make the stakes feel real.
Yeah.
Action doesn't seem visceral, and you're like, yeah, all of this very floaty. CGI is very floaty that way. It's like punches
It's
don't
cheap.
land. Yeah, like punches don't land. Body blows don't feel like it's doing anything. You're just like, yeah, these two people are swinging at thin air. We can see, they weren't in front of each other in reality. And we're like, yeah, whatever. Like, I don't care what happens to them. I mean, that's happened to me with Marvel. I don't give a shit anymore. So.
Coming to my last point, I mean, continuing on the trend of where are the action adventure films, where are the Indian action adventure films? Why have we as a society allowed the jump from no action adventure films to straight up CGI superhero movies? Because Uncharted, funnily enough, coming back to Uncharted. Uncharted has a DLC, or has a smaller game. It's called The Lost Legacy, and it's set in South India. And one of the protagonists is half Indian, Chloe Fraser. Her father is, and it's set around the Tamil Nadu region, and it's the quest for searching for Ganesha's tusk, because there is in the Hoysala region. So it's set in the Western Ghats.
Sorry, the reason I'm laughing is when you said South India, I was thinking, are there historical adventure films set in South India? And I got reminded of Rudraksh.
Rudraksha.
Technically, it ticks all your boxes, right?
It
Set
does,
in
but it's a
India,
terrible film.
historic. Yeah. So maybe it's because of those experience people are like, what, fuck that genre. We're not even touching that with a 10-foot pole. We don't want another Rudraksh in our lives.
Is that the only film to have come out, though? Rudraksh, I mean, since the 80s. And you're telling me Rudraksh with Suresh Shetty and frosted hair tips. This was 2004, 2005. It's a terrible film.
There aren't many adventure films rooted in history that come to my mind, at least. I mean, you have adventure films per se. I mean, Rohit Shetty exists, right? So you have those. I mean, they're not. You never said they had to be good. Right? So
Okay, but where are the good
they do
ones, dude?
exist.
But where is that swashbuckling hero that is suddenly going after this mysterious artifact that this rival faction needs for their nefarious needs, aided by this really smart female lead?
मर्द
And
को
this,
दर्द नहीं होता.
is that the film?
I mean, it's set in the current age, but it has a very offbeat, charming hero. A very capable female son. I won't say sidekick. She's equal parts, right? So, and you have a very compelling villain in Gulshan Devaya's character. Gulshan Devaya is his mentor kind of figure, and and his twin brother is also played by Gulshan Devaya.
That's a superhero movie, right? Basically, right? It's like meant to be.
It's a superhero movie where he doesn't have his superpower is that he doesn't feel pain
Feel
because
pain,
of some genetic condition. So it's a nice movie. It's not set in history, but it's swashbuckling in its own way. That's the only movie I can think of. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but good movie that I watched recently.
It's kind of sad. The Mummy came out nearly, 23, 22 years ago?
I'm telling you, it is
1999.
Rudraksh. It just came and killed any potential the genre had. You look
Can
at
we talk about
you look at Sunil Shetty and you're just sold. I'm never watching this
You know,
sort of movie
I
ever
forgot,
again.
we forgot to bring this up. We forgot to bring this up before we wrap this episode up and talk about how The Mummy is the last great action adventure film to be made. We have to talk about the reboot because the next episode on this series, guys, is Mission Impossible. Which one we don't know yet, but it is only right that we address the flaming turd that was the 2017
We
reboot.
have to.
Quick 5 minutes, because I was really scared that Tom Cruise was about to shit all over Brendan Fraser's legacy, because up until that point, Brendan Fraser, starting in the 2010s, had kind of disappeared. He'd been gone through a very tough time in his career, and this was coming out, and I was afraid that it was about to like wipe the legacy of the 99 film, and it did anything but that. In fact, it kind of bolstered it to that for the other film's legacy, because this was so bad. This was a terrible, terrible film, uh, directed by Robert Kurtzman. I should have known then only, and it spent so much time setting up this dark universe that Universal really got excited with, because the Marvel was doing so well, and they tried shoehorning that, and then not realizing that they had to like also put Tom Cruise as the face of this film. I don't even remember Tom Cruise's name in this movie. I think his name is Nick something. Yeah, and there's Jake Johnson who's playing this undead character, and Russell Crowe is Dr. Jekyll, and he's supposed to be like the Nick Fury of this group. Annabelle Wallace is also in here as some uh, like a damsel in distress, doesn't do much. Sophia, what's her name? Butella, no?
Who?
The
Modern
what's her
Family.
name? Huh? No.
Modern Family. Sofia Vergara. No.
Sophia Butella, the dancer, the French actress. She was in Climax. She plays the mummy in this movie. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, and they try to recreate the iconic face in the cloud, in the sky,
What?
sand such a scenario, and it's terrible. Like the 1991's version it looks cheesy, but it's still a lot of fun. It's infinitely better though.
Ah, thank God. I mean, the only swashbuckling, I wouldn't say swashbuckling, it is swashbuckling. And the movie we're going to discuss next week is Swashbuckling. It's probably the only franchise we have where we can it's dependable enough to keep churning out these movies that we love to watch on the big screen.
For sure.
Which is what we're going to be talking about next week. But yeah, coming back to answer the question that started it all, I don't remember any good. What I would say, the closest I can think of is Singham, but even Singham is not. It's not.
It's not a historical action adventure by any stretch.
I'm thinking action comedy. It's not even action. It's not. It's a far cry. There is no movie.
Yeah. Guys, I'm looking at the camera now. Guys,
Yeah.
where are our films, dude? Like, come on. I don't want to see Brahmastra 2. I want to see like...
Hey, yeah, Ponniyin Selvan. Why are we having such a Bollywood?
Ponniyin Selvan is a historical epic. It's not an Indiana Jones light.
Okay, it doesn't have the humorous aspect as much, and yeah, it does come from a very serious epic. I'm trying.
Yeah,
I'm trying.
It does not exist, unfortunately. But that's why The Mummy is still so good, and it's such a fun, breezy watch. One of my favorite action adventure films. Go so far as to call it in my top 5 action adventure films of all time. If you have not seen it, how have you not seen this movie?
Yeah.
It is everywhere. It's
a lot more easily in my top 5 because I haven't watched. Now I have watched 3 indie films. Indiana Jones. Yeah, it's still in my top 5.
Which 3 have you watched?
The trilogy. The original.
Good. Stop. I mean, watch Dial of Destiny. I wouldn't say it don't, because at 80 years old, I hope to be as active as Harrison Ford is what I'll say, man. That man is just... I am on a Harrison Ford binge now. I've been watching a lot of his older films, like his late 80s to early 90s. So
nice.
Such a good, such presence, I think. And we will never see the likes of him ever again, or that kind of actor ever again. He's the last of a dying breed. But if Brendan Fraser decides to return for The Mummy, I think he showed up at a screening as part of his PR tour for The Whale. And he showed up in the costume at a screening in London and said, if they want to make a sequel, I'm always in. I have never been this unsalaried and unemployed for so long, but yet been so in demand. So I'm definitely
He can play him.
ready to come back. No, I wanted to be Rick O'Connell. Let him be Rick O'Connell. Old man Rick.
Yeah, old man. Like he'll have to really.
Yeah, shed the kilos.
Yeah, but yeah, I'd watch that.
Yeah. Okay, that's us.
Yes.
On this week, we're back with Mission Impossible next week, and then
we got to pick one of the movies, right?
One of the movies. We'll figure that out. Until then,
Fallout.
Probably it's going to be Fallout. I'm taking I'm like, is it going to be Ghost Nation? Will it be Rogue Nation? No, what? Ghost Protocol? Rogue Nation? And it's probably going to be Fallout. I love Fallout.
Yeah. It's Fallout.
Definitely. Okay. We'll see you on the next episode, everyone. Take care. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.